Good morning. It's still morning here in the East Coast, and of course it's morning on the West Coast. So thank you so much. We appreciate. I know it's early morning, but we look very much forward to your presentation today. So I'm here as we did yesterday. I'm going to introduce the judges, and then afterwards we'll have to feel free to introduce yourselves. My name is Emmanuel Caudillo, Senior Advisor with the White House Hispanic Prosperity Initiative in Washington, D.C. And my fellow judges are
Jen Howell, Co-Executive Director of Virginia Civics.
Tom Tinder, an attorney from Charleston, West Virginia.
And if our panelists may introduce themselves and their teacher, please.
Good morning. I am Aya Damaj, and me and my colleagues are in 8th grade from Faith Lutheran Middle School and High School, representing Unit 3.
Good morning. My name is Olivia Ardeen.
And I'm Bella Morrow. Thank you for hearing our speech at this congressional hearing, and this is our teacher, Miss Carol.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read the question, and once I'm done reading the question, then you may begin with your presentation. No society, certainly not a large and a heterogeneous one, can fail in time to explode if it is deprived of the arts of compromise. No good society can be unprincipled, and no viable society can be principle-ridden. Do you agree or disagree with this opinion? What compromises were made at the Constitutional Convention of 1787? What are the benefits and costs of those compromises? How would you distinguish between someone who is unprincipled and someone who is principle-ridden? You may begin.
Compromises are essential to the structure of the government. The system of checks and balances keep the government grounded and help everything work smoothly. It can also be seen that the government has to remain at a point of being neutral. It can never remain too unprincipled or too principle-ridden. This is part of the reason why the U.S. government works hard to keep a system of checks and balances controlled by separate branches to never abuse their powers. The United States government works in a system of using the middle ground to negotiate.
The framers took into account both points of view of the North and South and made compromises to get our country to run smoothly. The first compromise made was that the national government would not end slave trade before 1808, which still helped the South but helped the North from a long-term standpoint by beginning to end slavery. Some other compromises made include the 3/5 Compromise and Fugitive Slave Clause. They also created the Electoral College as a system for electing our presidents. As a result of the compromises made between the northern and southern states, the framers made some additions to the Constitution.
Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 of the Constitution says, Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay debts, but shall be uniform throughout the United States. This section talks about what the northern states gained. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 represents what the South gained, stating, the migration or importation of such persons shall not be prohibited by the year 1808.
There are benefits and costs for Federalists and Anti-Federalists in the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Similar situations also happen currently. In 2019, there was a government shutdown issued by the president at the time, and both political parties had to work together for each of their goals to be reached.
The Great Compromise benefited Federalists by giving them the strong constitutional government they wanted and creating the Electoral College as described in Federalist Paper 68. For Anti-Federalists, they received sections that guaranteed their rights would be protected. The cost for Federalists was adding a Bill of Rights, and the cost for Anti-Federalists was putting themselves at risk of being ruled in something similar to a monarchy again. An example of a compromise found within the U.S. Constitution is the 3/5 Compromise that was abolished in 1868. This discussed how 3/5 of a slave would determine the state's representation in government.
The nature of principles and the standard at which people are held change as society grows. The idea of principality is derivative from morality, and the moral ideals that make a person either principled or unprincipled. In society today, morality consists mostly of following community guidelines and laws.
To dive deeper into morality, we must look into the philosophy of it. Immanuel Kant is one of the most famous moral philosophers in history. Kant's theory is based on the fact that any selfish act is morally unworthy. Kant's theory also states that even if an action is morally unworthy, that does not make a person bad.
In 1984, Alvin Kennard stole $50.75 from a bakery. Because he had a history of crime, the judge had to sentence him to 36 years in jail. In today's society, any crime is considered unprincipled, as shown in this court case, regardless of the overly large consequences. So in short, no one is completely principled or unprincipled. They're simply labeled that due to what society deems acceptable.
In Federalist Paper 54, James Madison says about slavery, "The magnitude of this evil among us is so deeply felt, and so universally acknowledged, that no merit could be greater than that of devising a satisfactory remedy for it. Compromises had to be made to restore order in our country, even though many were controversial." In the unnamed court case involving John Carton, he wrote, "Congress did not have the power to interfere with slavery in the Western territories. This further denounced the compromises made, causing an argument to arise about their validity. Creating compromises in our society today all comes down to what people believe defines the ideas of morality and principality to match our social standards."
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. And now we're going to go for a couple minutes here of discussions. So my first question is, compromise is often considered an art. Is that an apt description? Why or why not?
I believe it is an art because you need to do it in such a way where both sides feel like they're happy with what they gained and also that they feel like what they lost is valid and really just benefits the common good of the compromise and what's best for people. And an anonymous quote states that a compromise is the art of dividing a cake in such a way where everyone feels like they got the biggest piece.
To add on to my colleague, I agree with her because compromise has to be done in a very delicate way so that neither side of an argument feels like they are being undermined and underrepresented. So it's very important that it's dealt with carefully, just like how art, you have to be very careful.
And to add on to both of them, I totally agree with what they're saying in the fact that compromise isn't really about losing completely, it's about gaining something. And this is seen when Donna Martinelli once said, compromise is not about losing, it's about deciding that the other person has just as much right to be happy with the end result as you do.
Do you think that it's become more difficult for Americans to compromise on major public issues? And if so, why is it more difficult?
I definitely believe that it is more difficult in society today because we're divided on so many issues. I mean, we even see this in the division of parties where each party has their own ideas, and that makes it very hard to compromise because they're both so strong in what they believe.
To add on to my colleague, there are many instances in our today's world where it's super hard to compromise, such as the problem with masks. Like many don't want to wear masks, but others believe that they should because it's been scientifically proven to stop the spread or lessen the spread of the coronavirus. And people don't want to compromise on that to stop the pandemic.
And to add on to that, some compromises are easier made at a lower standard because higher ups tend to focus more on the power of a situation and what they can gain instead of what everyone can gain from a situation, which is seen in a deal going on in Arizona where there is a ban set where heating companies aren't allowed to turn their power off from June to October, or if it reaches above 95 degrees or below 32 degrees because of for the health of the people in Arizona. And both of the companies, the government and the heating companies, are benefiting from that. And while we might not see as many compromises that happen successfully in higher ups without loads and loads of thinking and processes going into it, they still happen at a lower standard today.
You mentioned the Electoral College, and there are discussions going on now about making changes to the Electoral College, either in how it functions or perhaps even going to a popular vote of our presidents. What is your feeling about that, and why or why not should there be changes?
There should be changes to the Electoral College because it can be seen that the popular vote really better represents the people and it better portrays their voice rather than just going based off of the Electoral College.
I respectfully disagree with my colleague. the Electoral College is one of the main compromises made at the Constitutional Convention, and it is seen in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. And if we were to be changing that, it would not give the smaller states the proper representation they deserve, because the larger states' popular vote will completely undermine and overpower their votes. And I think even though for example, the 2016 election, how Hillary won the popular vote and Trump won from the Electoral College, I think it's still very important in how we have representation today.
Yeah, and to add on to both of them, I personally agree with the fact that while in the Electoral College, many look at it, and the way that we graph it is a lot of the people that should be getting votes, their votes seem to be coming in at a smaller rate compared to the people who live in different states, just because of how many people really live in one state compared to how many people live in another, and how it's not counted by how many people equals one vote. It's counted by just graphing it all together and seeing if that's what works best.
My next question comes from your presentation. You talked about no one's really principled or unprincipled, that those are labels. Labels, they're deemed acceptable. So in your opinion, who's making those labels? Or is that us? Is that the political parties? Is that the national leaders? Who are making these labels on what does it mean to be principled or unprincipled?
I believe that anyone can really make these labels, whether it be like political parties or government officials or even laws, but people can make it on their own based on what they think is right or wrong, because everyone has a different idea of what they believe to be right and wrong. And if someone doesn't fit within those, then they would be classified as principled or unprincipled in one person's eyes. And it really just depends on the perspective of people, I believe. And we've even seen other philosophers such as David Hume state that being principled or unprincipled solely depends on their idea of humanity and their idea and their feelings towards the benefit and downfall of others.
To add on to my colleague, I think what society deems principled and unprincipled is just decided on how we are progressing as like a nation and as a world. For example, in the past, in a court case, it's called Dred Scott versus Sanford, it regarded major constitutional questions on slavery and the validity of the Missouri Compromise. And like one of the main arguments was whether slaves were okay or not and whether they were citizens or not. And during that time, we could see that slaves were considered principled, and there was nothing wrong with that. But if we hadn't abolished slavery at all, and I think it would eventually be deemed unprincipled, even without the compromises made.
And to add on to that, I think the ideas of morality are mainly controlled by the society around it and whose ideas of what's around it. So to quote Thomas Hobbes, moral philosophy is nothing but the science of what is good and evil in conversation and society of mankind. Good and evil are names that signify our appetites and aversions, in which different tempers, customs, and doctrines of men are different.
All right, you gave some examples in your opening of compromises that would be sort of considered win-win and compromises that were kind of lose-lose. So how would you sort of characterize the difference between these? How do we get a win-win versus how do we get a losing kind of compromise? And how do we avoid the losing compromises?
I think you really just need to make sure that each side of the compromise gets something that they want. And I mean, it'll always be giving up something, but as long as they get one of their main ideas through, I believe that would be a win-win situation.
Wonderful, wonderful. Excellent, excellent presentation. Give yourself a deep breath and release. Congratulations. It's been an incredible past couple of days spending time with you and be able to hear your opinions and hear your insights on very relevant topics today. I mean, they were relevant back in 1787 and they're just as relevant today. And I appreciate all your insights, and even what I liked about your presentation was just the use of these quotes of philosophers. You use a lot of quotes. And I really enjoyed it. It really added depth to your presentation, and it really highlighted a lot that you were talking about, and a lot that you were sharing, especially in regards to this my last question about who makes the labels, and sharing about, there's a thing that adds more depth to your presentation. So I encourage you to continue doing that in future areas, whether it be future We the People competitions or future areas in civic engagement. Use them to guide you in your research too. I think that it's great to do, and I just appreciate your teamwork. Appreciate the insight that you all provided. I like some of your compromise quotes you use, like, it's about dividing the cake, ensuring that you don't just got the biggest, you're making sure that everyone who got a piece of this compromise pie thought they had the biggest piece. And I really love that quote you added. Thank you so much for adding that. And so I'll pass it on to my fellow judges, but I appreciate all the hard work you've done this weekend, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
And I think Emmanuel and I were sharing a notebook because I wrote down pretty much the same things. So I really loved your use of quotes to illustrate your points. I also wrote down the piece about dividing a cake, but I think you brought a lot of philosophy into this discussion, and it is a very philosophical question. But I think what was so masterful about your presentation was that you were able to ground all of that philosophy in concrete examples, in historical examples, and in examples of things that are going on today. So I really thought it was a strong performance. I mean, really well done. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm a little bit slow today. Let me start off by congratulating your teacher for doing an outstanding job in educating you and helping you. And let me just congratulate you for just an excellent presentation. I want to start out by saying that your presentation, you did well yesterday. I mean, I think you probably felt you did well, and we thought you did well. You did better today. You did much better. And it was because you took some of the suggestions that we made to you, and you doubled down on them or whatever. The examples that you gave, the 2019 shutdown, mass court cases, and then of course the mentions of all those quotes that were right on the point. I mean, they just weren't random quotes thrown out there. They were right on the point. It was just a very good opening presentation, and then you responded superbly to our questions. You're to be commended for what a good job that you have done. Your teacher and you are inspiring for us because with having good teachers like you have, and with having outstanding students like you, with so much knowledge and so much leadership skills, we feel very confident and comfortable in the future in your school, in your community, in your state, and in our nation. Please don't let this be the end of just 2 days of presentations after weeks and weeks of researching and preparing. Please continue to use your leadership skills in the future. We need to have you so that we can have a bright future for all of us. Thank you very much. Congratulations to you, and best of luck to you.